Well, I discovered that Bitcoin was freedom by observing that people who live under dictatorships and very repressive governments were able to use Bitcoin to achieve their goals and aims, regardless of what their government wanted to do, or regardless of what their government said. And that is not something that's possible with the traditional money structures. I've observed that in countless countries around the world, for billions of people, money is basically used as a weapon by governments and corporations against people to steal from them, to restrict their activities, and to basically exploit their time. I mean, it's time theft, right? So today, more than 2 billion people live under double-digit inflation, including in the heart of Europe, I would add. More than 1.5 billion people live under absolutely intense financial surveillance in China and sort of territories near China. And far, far more than that live in societies where they don't have the same kind of financial access to markets and applications that we do in the United States. So for most people around the world, you know, they're living in a situation where they don't have the same financial abilities as we do. There's 4.3 billion people who live under authoritarian governments in 95 countries, and those are, you know, people who live under arbitrary rule of law. They don't have property rights. So in some sense, like, the reason why Bitcoin is freedom is it gives anybody with internet access, and we can get to that, property rights for the first time in history. They've never had actual property rights before. Property rights is something that the state kind of like gives out at its pleasure, and you kind of need the state to protect your property rights. Bitcoin gives anyone actual property rights that they can defend themselves with math to a very reasonable degree, and that to me is pretty much a revolution.
And one of the chapters of your book, just to dig a little deeper before we come to you on the end there, Craig, one of the chapters of your book is Bitcoin is a Trojan horse for freedom. What does this mean, like, put simply? How does this play out?
Well, I think that, generally speaking, there are big limitations to, as we discussed, access to Bitcoin, right? So, you know, I think that there is vast potential for us as a community to work on UX and make Bitcoin easier for people to use. Certainly that's like a big challenge of our time. But generally speaking, like, you know, there's also some personal responsibility there, right? We were talking about how knowledge is freedom, right? Like, books are freedom, knowledge is freedom, information is freedom, but you have to learn how to read first, right? So your parents or your community have to teach you how to read to access that freedom. So it's similar with Bitcoin. Like, we're gonna have to teach people how to Bitcoin to get the freedom. You're not just naturally born with that knowledge. I think it'll get a lot easier in the future, but this is an area where I just want to devote my time to, is helping people understand it and get them involved and on board as soon as possible. I think the biggest regret we're going to have in 10 years is that we didn't spend more time introducing people to Bitcoin.
Exactly. Go out there and orange pill people, by the way, guys. Orange pill means, for those uninitiated, it means to teach people about Bitcoin.